Hi, this is Shelley Roden. I am the wife of Jeffrey Roden, the composer and musician, and I am here to ask him some questions about his work. So, Jeffrey, what were your earliest memories of music or other things that you experienced that led you to want to create music?
I was fortunate really to grow up in a time when there was so much great music around. And my older brother, who was my idol, listened to a great deal of different kinds of music, especially the blues. And then at home, we had a huge variety of show tunes and My Fair Lady, The King and I, Music Man, ethnic music, just everything playing as well. And I still really love that kind of music. It's both nostalgic and it's also incredibly well crafted music. I did not think really that I would wind up playing music, even though I did play flute and bassoon in school. I really thought I'd be a writer. I just have such a passion for books and reading, and that passion might even surpass my love of music. However, it was the 1960s, and everybody was in a band, and there was a great renaissance of bass playing, and I just realized I had to be a bass player. I really also, ever since I've been a child, have been very interested in listening to the sounds of birds and motors and really anything that makes a rhythmic pattern. I've always loved counting along and feeling the pulsation of these types of sounds. And between this and playing the bass, all this kind of stuff really influenced what I do now as a composer.
Could you describe the transition from being a bassist in popular music to the composer that you are now?
This is quite a good story as I auditioned for a French singer, Jean-Paul Vignon, and the audition involved quite a bit of reading very precise charts written by a famous arranger. And at the time, I couldn't sight read at all, and I could remember, though, the changes of the song, and so I played it. And the singer liked the way I played it, and so even though I'm sure everyone thought I was reading, I somehow managed to get the job. And once we were on the road, the music director at rehearsal said to me, "Hey man, play something at bar 9." And I said, "Hey man, tell me what you want to play and play it on the piano and I'll play it back for you." And he was just completely flabbergasted that I couldn't read music. So when the tour was over, he said to me, "You should learn how to read and I'll hire you." And then I looked around for a teacher and I found my wonderful saintly bass teacher, Ray Siegel, who was a session player at Paramount and a bunch of other places. And that's really when the transition began. Because once I could read, it opened up so many possibilities for playing and writing. And I knew that I wanted to take the bass somewhere that it hadn't been before. So I began to play with a lot more advanced players, playing more advanced music. All of this influenced where I would eventually wind up. And of course, the music I began with was filled with unbelievably complex odd times and ridiculous tempos. And it was quite fun, but the musicians were, of course, interested because it was something new and fresh. And this eventually led to my first CDs where I played most of the music along with Steve Roden and was really able to make my own statement with the bass. It was still technical virtuosity in my mind, and I needed to kind of exhaust that kind of John Coltrane complex. One night I had a gig where I played everything I could possibly think of as quickly as I could possibly play it. And from that point forward, inexplicably, my work started to get slower and simpler and more focused on certain aspects of the music that would result more in beauty than in virtuosity.
Do you think that the unique quality of the electric bass shaped your current compositional approach? If so, in what way?
The bass will always be the way that I think of music. I almost always worked at constructing first the horizontal, the line, and then coloring and filling out the rest of the music using the vertical or the harmonic. The bass, especially as time moves on, is frequently obscured by many things in music. So having grown up in music where the bass was primary other than the vocal, and having a huge number of solo bass performances myself, I understand very clearly how little music it actually takes to move an audience. and how a very transparent texture forces the musicians into the position of having to play as perfectly as possible because in those instances they are completely naked. When I play, I particularly love the moments where the bass was allowed its space and could display all the things it is capable of, not the harmonics and fancy tricks, just the wonderful rich beauty or its abilities to drive people to dance. In a strange way, having stood on a stage and been responsible for making a huge crowd of people who were very serious about their dance, I take what I learned from those experiences into the composing. I hope the work will take the listener from note one to the end without a lapse of interest, in a similar manner to when one is playing for dancers, there can be no let up in the groove.
How would you define the term interpretation? How important is it for you to closely work together with the artists performing your work?
I'm not really experienced enough to really answer that question other than to say the work as presented will either make sense to the musician or they will be uninterested in playing it. It does require a certain kind of technical ability, which is unusual due to the tempos and the nakedness of the work I mentioned earlier. I have very little interest in creating rhythms that are complex or any kinds of musicianly difficulties which most musicians find interesting and challenging. I definitely understand this, having been a musician. However, at this time I'm just not interested in creating this kind of music. So I'd be happy to discuss the work with those playing it, but I think in their own way the music is best served with the musicians finding their own way. Sandro Ivo Bartoli's performance of the pieces for the solo piano has also really encouraged me to continue with this in mind, as he and I had the briefest of email conversations, and the score itself has the minimum amount of detail possible, and yet he delivered a performance which to the composer's mind was brilliant and moving and exceeded my own expectations of the pieces.
What makes your piece called The Bridge to the Other Place so significant to you?
The Bridge to the Other Place is really kind of a summation. It's like an epitaph. It's the end of this long 40-something year journey of finding all the things that I wanted to do at the bass. And kind of in this there's a great joy, and then there's a muted sadness because I've been unable to find anything new for the bass since then. And yet in this work there's everything which has followed, and it's really the template for everything I'm composing now. And really the story of the making of The Bridge to the Other Place is also kind of like a microcosm of my entire career. It was recorded at a really fine studio in LA in the middle of a intense heat wave. And we started at noon, and at midnight there was no usable music, even though through the 12 hours that preceded that was probably the best, most inspired playing of my adult life. And at some point during every take, the building would make an audible noise. It creaked, it cracked. And in a normal recording, these sounds would have been probably never heard because the music would have been loud enough to obscure them. However, my work for the solo bass was so quiet that the building sounds were completely disruptive. So at midnight, after 12 hours of playing by myself without really taking a break, I had to basically record the entire record in the next 4 or so hours. It was completely absurd. So the CD has many points to it, and it really taught me many things about struggle and perseverance, and kind of really ultimately about acceptance. My good friend Tobias Fischer has said so many wonderful things about this work, and so even from disappointment, I learned can come the satisfaction of still moving someone else.
There is a silence to your work that is unmistakable. Do you find spiritual refuge in your work? And if so, could you tell us something about that psychological and somatic process?
I don't really expect other people to respond to the work in a specific fashion, other than I just hope that they respond to it in some way. I find the work for me is a personal ecstasy, and I do feel very connected to God when I'm working and listening to it. This, however, has almost nothing to do with silence and more to do with my intention and my desire to be of service and to serve some useful purpose. I use silence mostly for practical purposes. It's a perfect means for transitions between elements that cannot be connected without a great deal of kind of useless material. It provides a place for the mind and the ear to rest, and it also allows the ear and the mind to prepare for what is to follow in the work. As I've gotten older, I find it much harder and harder to follow music that does not give me a chance to absorb what I have heard and to prepare myself for what is next. And silence can give us little spaces to dream and wander off, maybe hear an inner voice, maybe find some teeny realization or message. We live in a world of just complete babble, and I just hope to find a respite and an opening to another world, a world maybe that's more clear and maybe where beauty has some value. Although I'm happy whatever journey the listener decides to take, the silence is just the frame of the picture. It's the breath of a conversation, a moment where everything stops and somebody can find themselves. And because I'm a person that's always moved by small things that other people seem not to notice, for me the silence is just so necessary to point out these kind of images of things I see every day, maybe even going back to the bass, how one small perfect bass note will fill a room like the gong of a temple, or just some beautiful vibration.
We have talked about the essence of your music having a critical factor, which is beauty. What other things instill or have instilled this beauty in you that you could channel into your music?
As I think I mentioned, I really appreciate the grandeur of significant events of beauty, big symphonies, major works by other people. However, I'm really interested and moved more by those things that are subtly buried and perhaps not really noticeable. Eyes, sentences in a novel, sometimes jokes that are so ridiculous that they possess a beauty which, to me, is a reflection on the absurdity of being human. Because really, beauty is everywhere in the world, and we only have to find that means by which we can appreciate it. I don't really set out to create anything beautiful in any specific way, and if I've created anything beautiful, it would have only resulted from a lifetime of trying to see and hear it, and make that seeing and hearing a part of my existence and my means of interacting with the world.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts about the work. Again, this is Jeffrey Roden and Shelley Roden, signing off.